So, hello everyone, and thank you very much to join this webinar this evening. And I'm very pleased to hopefully introduce you to the topic of this evening, that's with the title, The Ethical Downside to Keep a Reptile in a Vivarium. Just a brief introduction of myself. For those who don't know me or haven't followed the previous webinar, let me introduce myself briefly. My name is Gianluca, and I'm a vet who deals with exotics and zoo animal. And currently, I'm part of the clinical and teaching team at the Dick Vet Rabbit and Exotic Practice at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm particularly passionate about topics such as welfare and husbandry. And I created this series of webinars to try to bring the world of veterinary medicine to a level that is understandable for everyone. Obviously, we have already covered many topics, and you can find them, the recorded of these events on the YouTube channel page. So, going closer to the topic of this evening, as I say, the title want to be quite provocative, and especially for a vet that works with this type of animals, these species, but want essentially to be a constructive discussion. So please, there will be a chance obviously to interact through the chat. So if you have any question, observation, please pop the message in the chat, but always be polite and respectful of the others' ideas. And as I mentioned, you can find all the previous videos on the YouTube channel Daily Vet Exotics. There is also the Instagram page with some of the events that we already treated, some fun pictures, or anything else that's could help you if you want to obviously know more about exotic animals. But obviously, we need also your help. So if you have any ideas or suggestion or anything else that you want to listen about, please let us know, and then we will try to provide obviously specific and tailored webinars in the future. So, why a reptile? So, why a person should have a reptile? But first of all, probably because he's passionate about this animal, and be passionate about this animal, he tends to give them the best and offer the best quality of life, planning and mating a suitable vivarium, providing a right diet specific for the species. And some of these passionate person then can become breeders. So they can start to breed species. Some of them, they could be quite also endangered. And here could become obviously also the point of the conservation. So some breeders that's obviously they are dealing with some rare species, they have also a quite important rules in the conservation of few of these species. Obviously, the conservation point of view is probably represented more by institution as a zoos, but sometimes also private breeders can be very helpful. Then we have people that rescue reptiles. Depending on the law specific of the country, most of them are protected because are species of that territory of that country. So not all the species can be rescued and just kept at home, but in that case, people have to deal with and refer to association, organization, like here in UK, we have the RSPCA, the SSPCA, but there are obviously many others. Or sometimes a reptile could be also unwanted, like a Christmas present or inheritance from obviously other people, or again, something that we weren't expecting to receive, and then we could be quite unprepared to manage, and for many reasons. For example, we don't have a lot of space, time to dedicate, or the knowledge to deal with them. And there are, again, other few considerations around that are obviously rotating around reptiles. From the veterinary and clinical point of view, the most important one probably could be the zoonotic risk. So the disease that can be transmitted from animals to human. And the most famous one is the salmonella. And then there are many diseases that are appearing in the last few years. But again, mainly these mainly happen when the hygiene conditions are not the ideal one, or there is obviously a unsuitable cohabitation between people and reptiles. There is also the, again, from the vet point of view, the not very wise habits to kiss our tortoise or snake. I mean, this can be the easier way that we can acquire disease from them. Then, as I said, most of them, they could be threatened in their original environment. So if we are obviously capturing them from the wild and keeping captivity, we are going obviously to deplete the wild population. Then there is a consideration that will be most of the part of the discussion this evening on the quality of life that we can offer to this animal once they are in a vivarium, in captivity. Then we can have some genetic disease. These are mainly related to the breeding the species. And then we can have also not just a depletion of the species itself, but also the genetic depletion. It means that we are going to select with the breeding features that are not present in nature, and potentially they are not compatible with a good quality of life, or potentially can bring with them some disease or can predispose to some disease. Consider, for example, albinos. They are more susceptible to UV light. That's for a reptile is quite important. And so then they can also develop disease on the skin, on the scales. Or congenital conditions that are mainly related with the high selection and the inbreeding. The inbreeding, so means also breeds individuals that are also related by themselves, is very helpful from the breeding point of view to fix one of the features, but from a genetical and clinical point of view, as I said, can bring many problems. And also, keep a reptile is not a piece of cake, literally in the sense that reptiles not only require to be kept in their optimal temperature zone, that obviously that we know that the reptiles need some sort of temperature that is specific for their species, but we also have to keep in consideration humidity. If this animal is coming from a dry environment, desert or tropics, their diets that can quite different between the different species, between herbivore, omnivore, or carnivore. Some of the species, they need also to be brumated. So we have to know if the brumation is needed or not. And they have, again, some requirement specifically speaking about the UV light. About the temperature, all the reptiles have a preferred body temperature range, the PBT, which varies between species. Think about, obviously, some of the animals that are coming from, I don't know, Australia will be different from reptiles that are coming from North America. The preferred optimum temperature zone, the POTZ, is the range of the temperature, the gradient, that we need to physically provide to allow the reptile to maintain its optimal core body temperature within the preferred body temperature range. As you can see on the map that I put here, I have reported here, obviously there are many different obviously species that all them require different needs. For example, again, here you can see a bearded dragon that is coming from the Australia. We'll have a setup about all the parameters that we mentioned, respect a chameleon from the Madagascar, for example, a marginated or an Hermann tortoise from the Mediterranean area, or a red fur tortoise from the Central America. And in the same country, sometimes we have different needs. This is a map of the Italy, and the temperature here are definitely lower than probably has been in the last few days. But as you can see, obviously there is a difference between north and south, and also the Mediterranean tortoise that inhabits the peninsula, they can have different range of temperature that they could like or not. So we will have, for example, Greek and marginated tortoise that live mainly on the Sardinia. And then we have Herman tortoise all along the peninsula. And the tortoise that, for example, live in Tuscany, they will have completely different habits and needs than individuals that live instead in the very south, like, for example, Sicily. So when you acquire one of these animals, you should know where the species is coming from. Most of them now are not from the wild, are in way bred in captivity, but it's still important to know that specific species or subspecies where it's coming from. Because what happened is that we try, obviously, with them recreating the vivarium, which are the natural or closer as possible to the natural condition. But as you can see here, where I put the vivarium anatomy, this is very simplified. But there are many things that we have to put in, like starting from the ceramic bulb to guarantee anyway also that the temperature during the night is not going too low. The hotspot for the light, for the light, the day period, so to providing also light, the UV light, that should be put to a minimum distance. So every time you install UV light in a vivarium, you must be sure which are the requirements for that species and that this is not too close. Then obviously you have to provide adequate ventilation, because instead the humidity could be too high and predisposed to respiratory problems, for example. Provide a shelter, source of water, obviously food that should be inside, a substrate that could be ideal or not. Say that the newspaper from the hygienic point of view could be great because you can, and it's very cheap because you can clean every day, and you can allow also to monitor the feces, if the animal is going to the toilet or not, or if there is anything else unusual. And just remember, speaking about the light is not just UVA or UVB. There is also a component called infrared that for many years has been not considered, but now, because there are much more studies on this topic, we start to consider that probably, yes, it's not just a bulb, it could be a combination of them. But again, it's still is a working in progress. So, but what happened most of the time when we are taking an animal from the wild or potentially change their environment from what should be to what we want? Essentially this. So think that this is on the left-hand side. This is usually the environment where we can obviously find an Herman tortoise. This is a picture that I took in South Italy, in Puglia. And here is where you can easily find Herman tortoise or sometimes also Greek tortoise, but mainly Herman tortoise. And what we are literally doing is to move them from, or provide them an environment that is more like the one on the teeth, obviously on the right side, hand side. That yes, there is still a substrate, there is a shelter, there is a lamp, but as you can see, the difference massively is quite great. Or even something even easier, so something that is literally doesn't resemble at all what is the origin environment. Same for snakes. So they're from, say, a tropical forest. Then this is ideal. You see in the upright right side, where you can see this is in a zoo, is a very massive vivarium with all probably the misting system, the UV light system, eating system. So this is replicate very close, which could be the original environment. And then we relegate a snake, for example, in something like this, or even worse, in intensive breeding in racks, so where the snake is literally living all his life in a drawer. And to mention also lizard, for example, bearded dragon. Bearded dragon are coming from Australia, so desert area, and then we move a bearded dragon as any other exotic desert lizard in environment that is a little bit more, again, I don't want to say sterile, but very simplified with respect to how complex instead could be the original environment. Okay. And someone could say, especially for animals that's obviously living and born in captivity, that they didn't know or they don't know where they are coming from, because if it's born in captivity, they don't know how the original environment looks like. But you also have to bear in mind that their body, their metabolism, everything, their behavior has been forged by nature and natural selection in thousands of years. So also if we're moving and hatch an egg somewhere else, there is their body, when during the development, will be still made to live in a certain environment. So we tend to normalization. So it means that if it has been like this for years, it will be normal and morally acceptable. Means that if we kept a tortoise for years, why I should be concerned to instead move or improve the environment if there are no reason, because probably is already in use to that one. But this shouldn't be an excuse to not fulfill their needs. And here we are going on obviously the two key words of the evening: ethics and welfare. Obviously, the ethics studies the foundation that allow us to assign a deontological and normative status to human behavior. Okay, so is a moral. Obviously, ethics is a big umbrella term. It's all about moral responsibilities and values. In this case, in this specific case, we are speaking about our moral responsibility and values towards optimize the welfare of this animal. So consideration of animal physical, behavioral, and psychological well-being are a matter of moral importance. And it encompasses the ethical principle, values, and practice that guide how humans should treat animals. So it's essentially, obviously, try to assess the human activity that can be evaluated, distinguished between good or bad, right and wrong. The welfare, on the other side, is obviously the animal welfare, referred to the physical and mental well-being on an animal in relation to its living condition. Okay, so essentially is about ensuring animals have a good quality of life. And which are the instrument, the tools that we have, just to don't see this from a human being perspective, but more a animal perspective. So we have the 5 domains. This model focuses on the animal overall well-being by considering the 5 key areas: nutrition, environment, health, behavior, and mental state. Within each of the 5 domains, you have consideration for positive condition and negative condition. These are then linked to their effect, what happens if they are or not met. For example, poor nutrition, malnourishment, lack of enrichment, stereotypes. And this then establishes the mental state of an animal, either positive or negative. Okay, think what happens, obviously, if you don't have a good nutrition, or you are not living in a nice environment, like a very big and noisy city, your health is not great for many reasons, and then you are more stressed. Obviously, also your mental state will be not in a good place. So what could this mean for a reptile kept in a viv? So first, obviously, the first domain is the nutrition. This domain is assess the animal's access to sufficient and balanced and clean food and water. So the negative aspect, the negative experience, for example, is when a gecko, this is a Rhacodactylus, when a gecko is not receiving an appropriate diet, that lack of calcium. So this can predispose to metabolic bone disease, that can even obviously predispose to egg bounce, so the egg retention. Also not providing the water or a clean water, or more than obviously also predispose this animal to develop disease, but also can bring with it dehydration, because the animal is not able to drink and keep hydrated itself. And as a consequence, we can have sounds a very strange word, disecdesis, sounds a very difficult word, but it essentially means that the animal is not able to shed properly, because the shed will be so dehydrated and attached to their original skin that they won't be able to shed properly. So what is the solution? What are the solutions? So the positive aspect, for example, providing a diet that is adequate for the species, okay? Possibly as in the wild. And this means that will be proper and balanced. Think a tortoise that is eating just commercial pellets, or a tortoise that instead have access to a green area like a runner outside, or you are providing them with greens, not just like salad, but what we call weeds for a tortoise are a 5-star cuisine, because it's obviously what they usually eating in the wild. Then we have also provide water and the right humidity, and sometimes also supplements, because if we are not able to guarantee or offer a very complete diet, sometimes we have to rely on supplements. The second domain is the environment. So means that this domain examines the animal physical surrounding, including factors like temperature, space, and substrate. And the low metabolism in the negative experience that the animal can have, the low metabolism could be a consequence for the fact that we are not able to guarantee the preferred body temperature, so the PBT that we mentioned earlier, which is the optimal temperature range for a reptile's metabolic process. So if this is not reached, the metabolism of the reptile won't be active enough. So we can also provide the right diet, the right environment, a good health condition, but if the environment and specifically the temperature is not reached, the reptile could be anyway suffering in different ways. If the daylight, so means the circadian rhythms, are not guaranteed, we can have problems in the, for example, during the reproductive season. The animal could be quite stressed because it is, for example, during the winter, we have to shorten the daylight because it's how happen in the wild, and during the spring, summer, make them longer. If this doesn't happen, in the head of the reptile, say that we provide in 365 days a year, 12 hours per day, for the reptile will be always the good season, so spring, summer. Obstruction means that also we have to provide the right substrate, providing sands or anything that can be easily swollen by the reptiles. These happen mainly in the dragon, chameleon, or other lizards. They can swallow this substrate, and this can cause problem as an obstruction. Obviously, this topic need to be obviously expand quite a lot. So here I just mentioned here briefly. And also the environment should be proportionate. So the space available should be proportional to the number of animals that are in it, because these can bring to fights or bullying events between the different individuals. Which are the solution? What are the solution? For example, take and recreate the environment closer as possible to the wilds. Sometimes we can have some exception, but we have to try to reproduce the environment as much as possible closer to the original one. Means also providing the right number of hours of light per day, keeping in mind the right UV percentage, UVA, UVB, and infrareds. And also the enrichment should be something that we have to put in. As you see here, this is on the bottom right-hand side, is a outdoor enclosure where the tortoise are able to roaming around. They have a lot of space. There is a ratio between male and female that prevents possible bullying event, fights, or the male can absolutely try to compete themselves between themselves for the female. But there is also the presence of natural plants that the animal can safely eat, and they can also choose between them. So they don't have just one type of grass or plants, but they have many. And this can stimulate their ability to going around and choosing the plants that they prefer. Third domain is the health. This domain focuses on the animal physical well-being, including the absence of disease, injury, and pain. So the negative experience that the animal can obviously deal with are, for example, bacteria and virus infection. These can predispose because the health status of the animal is not great, so they could be more predisposed to this type of infection. They can also be predisposed to endo or ectoparasite. The ectoparasites are like these mites, all the parasites that are living on the surface of the body of the animal, so are visible. But instead, the endoparasites are the parasites that usually colonize the gastrointestinal tract. That's also, if we are not able to see them, they are still able to cause some problems. Then we have abscesses, sometimes related to the fact that if the animal is not receiving the right diet, these can predispose to health issues, or sometimes also because if the enclosure is too small, sometimes they can literally rub themselves against obviously branches or smash the muzzle against the window, the glass of the vivarium because they want to get out. Burns because the heat source that has been provided wasn't the suitable one or was in contact too much with the animal itself. Or also shell deformity. The shell deformity is a sign that is strictly related with the metabolic bone disease, so with the lack of calcium, than with providing the right diet. And the solution in this case could be regular health check, because if we are a closer eye on an animal and we know which are their needs and we can see when they doesn't look great, we can take in time and provide take the right action per time. An example could be the fecal test that can be done every year, because it doesn't mean that if I check my tortoise today was negative, that they will be negative also in 6 months or 12 months. So periodically fecal check are very helpful to prevent many other problems. We have to reduce the stress, because if an animal is stressed, will be anyway more predisposed to a health issue, and then this can make their immune system definitely much stronger. And safe viv. As I mentioned, the heat source should be, sometimes we can put around the heat source, heat lamp, a net, or we can put the heat pads or anything outside the viv, so the animal won't be in direct contact with them. The fourth domain is the behavior. This domain obviously explores the animal ability to express the natural behavior, such as foraging, playing, and social interaction. In our head, we think that reptiles, they don't need social interaction. Say that most of the reptile species is true, they don't need that. But there are few that instead, they can also live in small colonies, as we will see soon. The negative points that we can highlight in this case should be that they can develop stereotypes or boredom, because if the space that they are available doesn't allow them to express their natural behavior. Self-injuries, this is the picture that it's from the previous slide. So when because the space is too small, they try obviously to get out the viv, and they crash constantly against the glass of the vivarium. Or they can have also some excessive behavior, because if we put, for example, a male and a female, the male and the female doesn't have any chance to get away far enough. The male can start to be aggressive, that is not a type, but can make his behavior obviously excessive against the female itself, just because the female doesn't have the chance to get away from the male. Positive aspect, how we can convert so this in positive, could be guarantee for the species that they need social interaction. For example, rankings, they can live in colony, as many other species. We can provide a suitable space that can have at the same time both obviously good effect, that can provide a good enrichment and also allow the animals to compete for food and space itself. And we can also try to train this animal. Sounds a little bit weird because we usually associate the target training just to mammals, but it's possible also in reptiles. So we can, with a lot of time and patience, try to train them to respond to specific command, not vocal commands, so with a voice, but for example, with a stick or anything else that can trigger what's the behavior that we want in something real. And then we have the final domain that is the result of the sum of the 4 previous one, that is the mental state. So this domain considers the animal emotional experience, both positive and negative, and aim to understand how the animal feels subjectively. So the animal for the 5 domain is not considered like a thing, but is an individual that is able to feel and experience positive and negative experience. So in the negative side, what we have, that animal can be more aggressive. Again, aggressive, because as we said, if an animal is in not a good place, will be more susceptible because will be more stressed, will be more scared and less prone to be handled. People say, oh yeah, my snake bitten me several times, but where your snake is living in a good environment or not? Are you feeding them in a proper way or not? Are you providing them the good things, the good stuff? That means shelter, the right substrate, or if it's an arboreal snake, are you providing a branch where the snake can go and literally roost on top of it, or he has just a drawer where the snake lives and spend all his days? And the solution for this is try to make this experience more positive, because the animal will be more relaxed, will be less scared, more confident. And because all these experiences start to be up and represent a positive output. And also from a breeding point of view, if we want to consider that too, we can have and obtain better performances, because an animal that is healthier will be able also to reproduce better, give also better offspring. And here I put all the 5 domains together just to give you the all the positive changes that we can make, to show you how all of these are interconnected and how they can contribute to the final goal, which is the 5th domain. Okay, so you see that here I just put some of the arrows, but if you are going through, you can see that all these are all related to each other. And if one is not, say, great, also the others can be affected. And if all of the 4 are affected, also the 5th one could be not ideal, or what we really want to reach. So now we have all 5 positive domains. So if all the 4 domains are taken into account and respected, we will have an animal that feeds itself correctly in an environment that allows it to carry out their natural behavior, which are with a good state of health, interactive if obviously specific of if characteristics of that species with other individuals, as we said, for example, the ranking, and altogether they lead to the 5th domain, in which the animal mental state will be at the top grade. So, knowing all these variables, we could now argue the ethics of keeping reptiles in a vivarium. By using the 5 domains frameworks and identify our solution, we have begun to acknowledge our moral responsibility towards keeping a reptile in a viv. So we still continue to have a debate on whether it is right or wrong to have this animal activity. But in the meantime, we can do our best to ensure a positive mental health of our animals. Means that we have a moral responsibility to keep them in the optimal condition for the species. We have to avoid or mitigate unnecessary suffering, means already keeping a tortoise in a viv, not in the right temperature, means that the tortoise won't be able to grow properly, And this will predispose her to develop disease that possibly can cause suffering, pain, or discomfort to the tortoise itself. We have to rely on professional advice. That could be vets. Some breeders are very knowledgeable on this topic, and sometimes we can rely on them too, or pet shop. But I just want to remember you that for medical advice, the vets are the only say reference point that you can use, because breeder or pet shop are not able to give you advice, or shouldn't be allowed to give you advice on which med use or which other changes do from the clinical and medical point of view. A lot of common sense sometimes could help, and we should try to be more empathetic. So consider a tortoise not as an object, but a sentient animal creature, and all animals matters. Sometimes we tend to consider, oh, it's so nice, a puppy, a doggy puppy, a puppy dog, but we don't give the same attention, or we are not empathetic in the same way, for example, for a snake, because there are many other phobias behind them. Someone can argue, oh, but they are very expensive, you know. An advice could be, you can insure reptiles too. You can insure also a leopard gecko, as well as a tortoise, as well as a snake. So there are also insurance that can help you to keep your animal in the best condition. And just remember to rescue. Don't breed, don't buy, try to rescue. Because there are a lot of animals that has been abandoned, or that they deserve anyway a home. And obviously you can try to guarantee them the best condition.